This is an audio-visual study guide for chapter 21 of Dana Harris's Introduction to Biblical Greek Grammar. We skipped chapter 20 because that was an integration chapter that was mostly review, apart from a few details, which are nonetheless important. But we're moving on to chapter 21, which is a very large chapter and difficult to condense. So you're going to get a lot more of the textbook's wording in this presentation. So let's review the concept of verbal mood. Mood indicates how the speaker chooses to portray the actuality or potentiality of an event. Mood has to do with the manner in which a statement is made and not necessarily the truth of the statement. Subjunctive mood is the mood of probability or potentiality. It indicates that an action is uncertain but probable. It also may express futurity. So present subjunctive forms. To build present subjunctive forms, we begin with the present tense stem, use a lengthened connecting vowel, and add a primary personal ending. So we've got primary tense stem lu, lengthened connecting vowel omega, primary active personal ending men, inflected form becomes luomen. Aorist subjunctive forms. To build the first aorist subjunctive forms, we begin with the aorist tense stem, use a tense formative, use a lengthened connecting vowel, and add a primary personal ending. So you've got lu, tense formative of sigma, lengthened connecting vowel omega, primary active personal ending men, inflected form lusomen. For second aorist subjunctive forms, the aorist stem is sufficient for identifying the form as an aorist, and no tense formative is necessary. Thus, to build second aorist subjunctive forms, we begin with the aorist tense stem, use a lengthened connecting vowel, and add a primary personal ending. So you've got the tense stem lab, the lengthened connecting vowel omega, primary active personal ending men, the inflected form lavomen. And you're going to become familiar with those paradigms, so we're not going to dig more into that. Contract verbs. The subjunctive forms for contract verbs follow the patterns of vowel contraction discussed in chapter 18, the present subjunctive paradigm. Because some of the vowel contraction patterns result in lengthened vowels, there is an overlap between present subjunctive and present indicative forms for contract verbs. Consider the following paradigms in which corresponding indicative forms are listed in gray. Again, context will indicate which form is intended. For the aorist subjunctive, the final vowel of verb stem lengthens before the tense formative, but because there is no augment with the subjunctive and the indicative uses secondary personal endings, there is no overlap in aorist forms. For example, the aorist active indicative of poieo is poiesa, but the aorist active subjunctive is poiesa. So let's look at timao here. Timo, same as the indicative form. Timas, same as the indicative form. Tima, same as the indicative form. Timomen, same as the indicative form. Timate, same as the indicative form. And timosin, also the same as the indicative form. So for timao, you just have to look at the context to determine what the mood is, either indicative or subjunctive. That's not always the case. If we just start to look at poio, we see poio, same as the indicative form. Poies versus poies with alpha contraction and the eta. So you start to see some differences here in the forms. But for several of the forms are going to be the same, and you're going to have to look at context to understand whether it's indicative or subjunctive. So present middle subjunctive form, same thing. Timomai, tima, timatai, timometha, timaste, timontai. For timao, it's identical to the indicative, but poiomai and poiumai, immediately you see a difference in the form in some of the forms. But the second singular poie is the same. The paradigm for the subjunctive of emi, o ace a, omen ete osin. Subjunctive mood functions, main clause functions. So here it occurs as the main or independent verb in a main clause, and it can be hortatory, a command, or exhortation, always first person, nearly always plural. Paepen prosaltos, dielphoumen, esto perantes limnes. He said to them, let us go to the other side of the lake. So let us go, subjunctive. Deliberative poses a question for deliberation, maybe a real question or a rhetorical question. Tifagomen, what will we eat? Prohibition or negated command. Aorist subjunctives can have this function, does not occur with present, and it occurs commonly with second person, rarely with third. Me un merimnetsetae estein aurion. So do not worry about tomorrow. Emphatic negation or denial. This only occurs with the aorist. The use of ume plus the aorist subjunctive, or less commonly the future indicative, is the strongest form of negation you get in Koine Greek. So hosan me dexitai tein basilean tu theu os paidion ume es elthe es altein. Whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will certainly never enter into it. Okay, so more functions in the subjunctive, subordinate clause functions. So most of the subjunctives in the Greek New Testament occur in dependent clauses that are introduced with particular subordinating conjunctions. So these are contextual clues are often reliable clues that there's going to be a subjunctive. So one of the most common uses of the subjunctive is as a dependent verb in a hina clause, indicating purpose. This clause is sometimes called a purpose clause or telic clause. This usage is so common that you should look for a subjunctive whenever you see hina. So utus elthen es martyrian, hina martyrese eritu photos. This one came as a witness so that he might witness concerning the light. So that hina, and then the subjunctive. Less commonly, the subordinating conjunction hopos can also introduce a purpose clause with a dependent subjunctive. So, apangeleta moi hopos kago pros kuneso auto. So, report to me so that I also might worship him. When me is used in a hina or hopos clause, it indicates a negative purpose so that the consequence of the dependent clause might not happen. Regorete kai prosuk este hina me eselthete es erasmon. So watch and pray, lest, or so that you don't fall into temptation. Subjunctive is often used after verbs of fearing or warning and is introduced by me or one of its compounds, such as mepote. Say, o bethomen un mepote doce tisex homon fuster recenai. Therefore, let us fear lest any one of you might seem to have fallen short. Sometimes hina plus the subjunctive may indicate result. Tis himarten hutose oigonais auto hina tu flos dinethe. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind, and that is with the result that he was born. Subjunctive mood functions more in the subordinate clause functions. Less frequently, a hina clause can function substantively as the subject or predicate of a finite verb. So consider the following. Lege altois ho Jesus emon Roma estin hina poieso to thelematu empsantos me. My food, or Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me. A hina clause may also indicate the content of a finite verb. Te huios e tu theu epa to litho tuto hina genetai artos. If you are the Son of God, say to the stone that it should become bread. So the subjunctive indicates what it is that Jesus should say, according to the devil. A hina clause may function exegetically or appositionally to further explain something. En tuto edoxaste patermu hina carpon polum ferete kai geneste emoi mathitai. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and be my disciples. Indefinite relative clauses. So for this, you're going to get more of the book's explanation. Subjunctives often occur in indefinite relative clauses when the antecedent is either unknown or not intended to be specified, often because it indicates a generic class rather than a specific individual. So let's look at the previous example. Hoson me dexitai tein basileon, tu theu hospaidion, u me esilthe es altein. Whoever does not receive kingdom of God as a little child will certainly never enter into it. The use of hos or ho-an is common. Somewhat less common are hos-eon and ho-eon. The indefinite relative pronoun hostis, hetis, hoti can also be followed by the subjunctive, although this usage was beginning to be replaced by the indicative by the time of the Greek Testament. Indefinite temporal or spatial clauses, similar to the use of the subjunctive with indefinite relative clauses, is its use with adverbs, often used in combination with the particle on to indicate indefinite temporal or spatial clauses. These same adverbs can sometimes be used with the indicative if the actual time or place is known, as is indicated in some of the following examples. Consider the following examples. In the first, hotan occurs with the subjunctive, whereas in the second, hotef occurs with the indicative. The temporal particle hotan is formed from hate and an. Sude hotan prosuke eselthe esto tamian su. But you yourself, whenever you pray, enter into your storeroom. Kai hote engisusin es Jerusalema apostele duoton mathetonatu. And when they were coming near to Jerusalem, he sent 2 of his disciples. Similarly, heos an is usually followed by the subjunctive, whereas heos is followed by the indicative. Other indefinite temporal and spatial clauses are introduced by hopun, an, akrisu, mekrisu, and other related adverbs and particles. Third class conditional clauses. We've already discussed the use of the particle a to introduce the protasis of first and second class conditional clauses. The conjunction aon, formed from a and an, is used to introduce the protasis of a third class conditional. Although, as some of the above examples indicate, this is not the only function of aon. Third-class conditionals are quite common, whereas first and second-class conditionals present the protasis in a certain way for the sake of the argument. A third-class conditional presents a simple condition that, if met, has a specified result. There are no rhetorical assumptions intended. Third-class conditionals are sometimes further classified as future probable, or future more probable, or present general. A certain element of futurity is inherent in many conditionals, but a future probable conditional presents a condition that, if met, will lead to a future outcome. An example of this in English would be, if we finish our courses, then we will graduate. Here's an example from the Greek New Testament. Notice that the apodosis comes first and the protasis follows in this example. Tauta soi pranta doso ean eso proskuneses moi. I will give all these things to you if you fall down and worship me. A present general condition presents a general truth, such as if it rains, the ground gets wet. There is no inherent futurity to the statement. For example, ean epomen hoti hamartian uk ekomen eautos granomen kai ealetheia uk estin en himin. If we say that we have no sin, then we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. It should be clear from these examples that the Greek subjunctive has a wide range of meanings and functions. As you work through the above examples, you might consider comparing various English versions to see how the subjunctive is rendered. You are likely to find many variations in these translations. So that's it for chapter 21. A lot to learn and review here, and you've got the subjunctive paradigms to learn, and you need to be able to parse subjunctives and translate sentences that use subjunctive.